Hey guys, my name is Vishal and I welcome you all to this live session by Great Learning. In today's session, we would be talking about AWS, and while we do that, we would be discussing a particular service in AWS, that is EC2, Elastic Cloud Compute. Before we do that, I need a quick confirmation from you people if I'm audible to you guys or not. If yes, then quickly say yes in the chat box and we can move further. I'd also like to inform you that I would be taking up your questions that you throw in. So do ensure that you put forth your questions if you have any relevant questions to this topic, and I would be more than happy to answer all those questions right away. So again guys, since this is a streaming thing that is happening right now, the questions that you put forth would reach to me 10 seconds late. So if I miss out on your questions, do not worry, I'll take those questions in a while, but do ensure that you let your questions keep coming. I would also like to inform you people that at Great Learning, we have started Great Learning Academy, where there are 80 plus free courses with certifications, of course. So if you are looking to upscale in this COVID-19 time, ensure you do that and get a certification, because this is for a limited amount of time. I'd also like to inform you that we have started our app at Great Learning, and that app lets you seamlessly stream these courses. You can download those courses and watch those offline as well. And this is an ad-free app. Now, the moderators of this session will put forth the links for both Great Learning and Great Learning application for you to download or to register if you want. Having said that, guys, let's quickly get started with this session. Let me give you a quick intro to what are the offerings of this session, or what are the pointers that would be covered in this session. So guys, I'll be starting off this session by talking about what AWS is. You would understand what EC2 service exactly is, what are instances in AWS and in general, and what are the types of instances that AWS has to offer to you. We would also follow it up with the demo part, and there would be a lot of pointers that we would be discussing. It's a weekend and there's a construction that is happening near my place, and that is causing a lot of noise, so I apologize for the inconvenience that is caused to you people. Having said that, guys, let us get started. So guys, if you are aware that we have been having this series of sessions recently, introductory series of sessions, we've discussed cloud computing, AWS, Azure, storage services in AWS in our previous sessions. So if you're interested in getting to know those things in detail, I would suggest that you visit Great Learning's YouTube channel and do take a look at those videos that are there on that channel, so that probably you would find more link to what we are discussing. It's not like I won't be explaining these things in detail, but there are certain concepts that I've talked about in detail in those sessions. So if you are interested in getting to know those topics in a lot more detail, do visit Great Learning YouTube page and take a look at those videos and sessions as well, because those sessions are available on that platform. Having said that, let us try to understand what AWS is. So if you talk about AWS, it is a popular cloud service provider in the market. Basically, they provide on-demand services like computation, storage, networking, security. They even provide setups where you can actually go ahead and have the latest things practiced, like machine learning, Internet of Things, and a lot more things. So basically, AWS is nothing but a place which gives you these services on rental basis. And you can actually go ahead and rent these services on hourly or on minute or second basis. Yes, even on second basis. We'll talk about that as we move further. So what are the benefits of renting these services? Now, since these resources are made available to you in the form of service, you do not have to visit any particular place physically. These services are available to you online. All you have to do is log in and start using these services from anywhere in the world, and basically use internet to do that. So yes, that is what AWS is. It is one of the most popular cloud service providers in the market, and it does provide the services that I just mentioned. In fact, it has the largest market share. As I've already mentioned, I've discussed these things in detail in the other sessions, but that is not the exact point of discussion today. So I would be wrapping these things up quickly. Okay, so what are the benefits of using AWS? It gives you cost optimization. That means, as I've already mentioned, there is flexibility here. You can pay only for the resources that you're using and only for the time duration that you're using these services for. So I see there are questions that are already coming. Yes, guys, I'll be taking these questions in like 5 minutes time. Do not worry. What I normally do is I probably talk about a particular topic and then take certain amount of questions. So I would be taking your questions at exact or some spurts of times or durations in the interims. Do not worry about that. So coming back to this topic, you get cost optimization because you get to choose what resources you want to use and you can rent them for a limited duration or a limited amount of time. Security, yes, if you talk about AWS, it gives you shared security model. The fact that people assume that cloud platforms aren't secure is not true, because it does give you an option of choosing what set of security or security implementations that you actually want to go ahead and implement. So there is that freedom there, and they also take care of certain part of security on their own, which they feel is better, they control it. So you can always come to terms with the security thing and basically ensure that your system is secure to the greatest stretch or the largest stretch. Having said that, they also let you have, or they give you availability and disaster recovery. That means if you put your data there, it would be always available, and even if your data goes down, they give you the option of taking backups in advance, and once you do that, your data would be secure there. It is highly scalable, something that we will discuss in detail as we move further, and it is flexible as well. We'll discuss these parts as well. The fact that we will be talking about EC2 service today, so I'll talk about scalability and flexibility from that perspective. But I believe the terms are clear to you, what scalability is and what flexibility is. But if not, we'll actually go ahead and discuss that as well. So yeah, this is what AWS is in a nutshell. I always give this analogy. It is similar to consuming electricity, right? I mean, we consume a number of units of electricity basically in a month's time, and we pay the electricity board for providing that electricity to us. Now it is the board that takes care of everything, supplying it to your homes, supporting that electricity that is provided to your homes, and all the queries that concern these things, right? You only pay them for the units that you consume. Similarly, if you talk about computation or application hosting, that is what AWS does for you. It manages all these things for you. The storage, the networking, the setup part, the infrastructure part, you pay them only for the resources that you use and for the time duration you use them. So it is always better than actually going ahead and buying these resources because they are costly. Renting them is a cheaper or a more affordable affair basically. So that is what AWS is in a nutshell. Let's go ahead and try to understand some other concepts. So what exactly is EC2 service? Yes, so somebody has asked this question. What exactly is EC2 service? Yes, guys, I would be answering that question since this is the topic for today's session. We would be talking about EC2 at a stretch, so do not worry about that. So yeah, what exactly is EC2? Now, when you talk about cloud platforms, they provide you services in different forms, right? Or a service is made available to you in different ways. Say, for example, I want to rent infrastructure, right? That means I want storage, I want security, I want computation power, but I want to set it up myself. So I'm renting an infrastructure. I would actually just want to use the software in some case. I do not want to take care of all these things. Let somebody else manage it for me. Say, for example, my Gmail, right? I just want to type an email and send it to someone else. I am not concerned about who is managing it, who is taking care of the disaster recovery part and stuff like that, right? So that is software as a service. The entire software is given to me to use. I can just web login or app download it and start using it, right? The third one is your platform as a service. Here, you are building your own applications, putting in your own data on the platform, but platform is managed by someone else, right? I mean, they give you a right set of tools, they manage the storage, computation, security and everything. They give you a platform where they can say to you as in, okay, you want to use Python, build an application. Okay, you already have an application, put it on our platform and start using it. So that is what a platform is, and service given to you in this form is called as platform as a service. So these are three major service models. Now the reason I'm actually, oh, I'm sorry for the disturbance. Yeah. Now the reason I'm actually trying to mentioning or trying to explain you these pointers is EC2 is type of infrastructure as a service, right? Here you are setting up everything. As we get into the demo part, you'll see this part as in how we actually go ahead and set up these instances, right? So basically they are giving you infrastructure, right? So what exactly is EC2? What it does is it is nothing but a web service that provides you secure, scalable, resizable compute capacity in the cloud. And it is designed to make web scale cloud computing easier for developers. Now, this is what the definition says on my screen. Let me try and simplify this thing for you. So when you talk about EC2 in particular, what they do is they let you basically create instances or virtual machines. Now, we all know what virtual machines are, what instances are. If not, we'll be discussing that as we move further. But basically, what they do is they let you have virtual machines so that in case if you are in need of a particular infrastructure, specifically a computing system, you can actually go ahead and spawn this instance or virtual machine and start using it. You do not have to actually go ahead and buy this hardware or invest your money in taking care of these things. So that is what Amazon EC2 is exactly. This is what it is in a nutshell. As we move further, I'll talk about instances in detail. Probably that is where you'll understand what I'm talking about or what I mean by EC2, or what am I talking about these instances and virtual machines that we are trying to launch using this service. For now, you to understand, it is important to understand that it stands for Elastic Cloud Compute. That means it lets you spawn computation services or instances or virtual machines, and the fact that it lets you do it securely and lets you scale it up, scale it down depending upon the need of your web application. What are the features it has? It is highly scalable, it is cost efficient and flexible. So cost efficient, again we'll be discussing the costing part as we move further, and scalable is something that I've already talked about, but in the demo part you'll see what do I mean by scalability exactly. So let's just go ahead and try to understand what an instance is. This is something I should have covered first and then talked about EC2, but I wanted you to have some idea about what EC2 is. By now I believe it is clear to you people that it is an AWS service that basically lets you configure your computation resources, right, or instances or virtual machines. So now, since I'm talking about configuring instances, let us try and understand what an instance exactly is. Let me see if there are any questions. The OpenCV question is little out of place. I'll take that once we are close to the end of the session. Not worry about that. I do not see any more questions, so I believe you people are understanding whatever I'm talking. I'm hoping that as we move further, there would be more questions for you people to ask, and you'll start throwing in those questions that are specific to this topic. Guys, please ensure that the questions are as specific to the topic as possible, and we'll try and answer those at the earliest. And I'll take the OpenCV question. Do not worry about that. So, what is an instance exactly? Okay. Now, when you talk about an instance in particular, again, think of it as a virtual server for running applications on Amazon EC2. Okay, so mostly this instance term is used in reference to AWS because they prefer calling their virtual machines as instances. So what exactly are these instances? So to give you a scenario, think of it as it is a tiny computer now, which has its own hardware, storage, it has its own network through which it is connected to other systems. So just like a laptop, right? I mean, I have this laptop which has this Windows operating system or a Mac operating system. It has its own memory, storage, and I can do things that I want to do. Watch movies on it, run applications on top of it, build applications using this small machine, right? So when you talk about instance, think of it, think of that instance as this machine, and assume or not assume, what happens here is basically this instance or this machine is a part of a larger machine or a bigger setup. Say for example, this setup will have multiple such machines, right? So think of it as a data center which is there somewhere, and on top of it we are hosting these small machines. Now these machines are virtually present. Now what do I mean by virtually present? That means when I start my system and I launch an instance, I'm getting a feel of working on that particular instance, and it feels as if that instance is here in my system right away. But basically it is residing on some data center somewhere in the world. So it is nothing but, you can think of it as a set of hardware or small computers, a single machine or multiple machines that are clubbed together at one place and that are made available to you in the form of services. So this is what instances are. And when you talk about EC2 in particular, it lets you spawn these instances instantly and customize those or spawn those in a way that they meet your particular requirements of application hosting or creating your applications basically. Okay, so let us move further and try to talk about some other parts, or let us try and understand what kind of instances AWS has to offer to you, or EC2 in particular. So guys, this is where it gets tricky. We would be talking about a lot of types now. I mean, I'll be talking about instances based on the way they're classified under certain families. We talk about these instances based on their pricing, so their types would vary again, and then we'd also discuss these based on their applications. So there are a lot of instances that we would be talking about, so there would be a lot of theory discussion or concept discussion that would be happening today. So let us try and understand what are the types of instances that AWS has to offer to us. So these are some of the standard categorizations that are there. You have your general purpose instances. Now when I talk about the general purpose instances, I am talking about instances that give you optimal performance and they're also affordable. Now if you talk about applications where you want your system to respond to your queries or is available for your not processing exactly. Let's, to give you an example, let's say I'm dealing with a system which is constantly trying to interact with me. My customers are constantly trying to interact with me. Now this is where I would be needing good performance, right? A system that is always available, but since I'm using it constantly for a very long duration, I also do not want to pay a lot for it. So this is where I can actually go ahead and use general purpose instances. Again, when you say general purpose instances, there is another type of instance, that is, we classify those instances based on the performance. So those are burstable instances. So basically your general purpose instances are also burstable in nature. We'll talk about the burstable part as we move further. Do not worry about that. But general purpose instances, as I've mentioned, you need good performance at an affordable price. You always go for general purpose instances. Then you have your GPU instances. So these are good for your graphical processing basically. So your 3D modeling and stuff, if you want to do these kind of things, it is always nice if you actually go ahead and use your general purpose instances. Compute instances. So when you talk about compute instances, these are the instances that are used for processing heavy applications basically. So let's assume that you have an application where you have to process a lot of data. So you can actually opt for compute instances kind of, or compute instance family basically. Storage instances, now this is where you actually go ahead and store your data. I mean, this is where your data storage becomes very critical, as the name suggests. So to give you an example, we have big data applications, right? So if you talk about big data applications, it is always wiser to use storage instances there, because they take care of your ever-growing storage needs. And if you work with big data applications, you know that data is important here, and also the storing part is also important. So storage instances meet those kind of needs. memory instances. Now these applications are memory heavy, right? Say for example your RAM that you use. So this is where you run applications that basically need to focus more on the memory that you have in your existing system. So this is where memory instances come into picture. Let us try and understand some other points as well. So let's try and understand these instances based on the pricing part, as in how AWS classifies these instances based on the pricing part. So I do not see any questions coming, so I believe you people are through to what we are discussing. Let me quickly just go ahead and check it in my... I also stream this session parallelly on my phone so that I get to see your questions in the chat if there are any. So what does AWS architect mean? Can I start learning AWS from this video? Again, as I mentioned, this is a little off topic, but to quickly answer your question, I would like to mention that if you talk about AWS architect, this is more about designing your architectures, right? I mean, you would be designing cloud infrastructure here. If there is an existing infrastructure, how do you move that to cloud if your company is planning to do that or you are planning to do that? You discuss or you figure out ways in which you can build applications on top of cloud, what kind of resources you should use, and how you can cost optimize and make these applications robust enough to last on cloud platforms. So that is what a cloud architect does. Somebody also asked, can I start learning AWS here? Okay, so to be very specific, you can start with the foundations part first. If you talk about cloud computing, it is important you understand how computing works, right? So I would suggest that you explore some networking fundamentals. If you're not from a technical background, it is again important because people who are a part of technical education or have had technical education, for them it is important that they or they know actually what networking is, what computer architectures are, if they are from a computer technical background, right? So for people who are starting from a different background, ensure that you understand what networking is, spend some time exploring bash scripting, and then I would suggest spend some time exploring these cloud platforms like AWS, Azure, to understand how these cloud platforms work. Where do you start? You can always visit Great Learning YouTube channel. There you'll have those there are videos, something like Cloud Foundations, you have AWS tutorial, Azure tutorial. You start with these, get to understand how what is the flow of learning cloud computing there, Cloud Foundations and stuff like that. And if you feel to master these things, there's a free course available on Great Learning. Ensure you register there and get started if that suits you. Now coming back to the pricing model, now let us try and understand how are these instances made available to general public. If you talk about pricing perspective, now the instance that you actually go ahead and rent, you might have certain ways or needs in which you would actually require these instances. To give you an example, your on-demand instances, right? Now again, when you say on demand, this is something that you need, right? You're demanding something. So these instances are costly. They are costly compared to the other types that we are going to discuss, or some of the other types that we are going to discuss. See, it's like, to give you a simple example, now I reside in India and in Bangalore in particular. So there are these PG systems here, paying guest systems. So basically, if you talk about a paying guest or PG place, you can actually go ahead and rent a bed in that PG for a month, because you know that would satisfy your needs. Maybe you need a bed for a month only there, a room for a month only there, and probably you can rent that. So the PG owner will charge you for that month, and post that maybe you can leave that place. So you have a limited amount of commitment there, and this can happen instantly, right? So now these kind of requirements, say for example I need an instance for an hour or two, so I can always go for an on-demand kind of instance. Okay, Okay, so because I know I need it for a couple of hours, and I get that instance for that duration. So again, guys, the important point here is these instances basically meet the need of requirements where your instance requirement is little flex not flexible, little ardent. Say for example, I'm dealing with data that is not constant, or my service request, customer requests are not constants. I might experience some spike in the data, right? So in that case, I need to have instances that I can readily spawn in that duration and get that job done with the efficiency that I want. So that is where on-demand instances come into picture. And since you are demanding these for limited amount of times and for the requirements that are specific, these are costly as well. Dedicated instances. Now, when you talk about dedicated instances, these okay, let's first talk about OnSpot, because that would give you the flow to go to the dedicated part. So if you talk about OnSpot instances, now these are the instances that would be available, may be available, or may not be available. So this is like bidding for a particular instance or bidding for a particular stock. What do? You probably take a look at a particular stock and you feel that you want to invest your money in this thing, right? Why? Because you feel that that would meet your needs right now. So you might invest your money in there. But if you do not invest in it now, there's a possibility its price could drop or even increase, right? So that is what these on-spot instances are. So how does AWS give you these instances? Basically, when you talk about these instances, these are instances that may be available with AWS in a spare. So since they are there in spare, you can actually rent these. Since they are in spare, AWS also lets you rent it at somewhere around 90% cost of what your on-demand instances are. So these are cheaper for you. But these are not reliable for you because these may be available, may not be available. Just like moving to a new place, maybe to a new city, or traveling to a new city, and you wish to rent a hotel. If you just go there and try to look for a room, right, for your stay, or rent a room for your stay. So what will happen is you'll visit that place, and since you're looking for it in that duration, there's a possibility that you might get a room at a cheaper rate, or there's a possibility that rooms are not available and you're paying a lot of money there for those rooms depending upon the availability. So that is what an on-spot instance is. It depends upon the availability of that instance. So normally people who have temporary work, limited work, and it is not instance dependent or specification dependent, you can always opt for on-spot instances. So there's a possibility that that would serve the needs of your requirements that are temporary requirements, and solve the problems that you may face. Now let's talk about dedicated instances. Now the dedicated instances are one which are basically give you the freedom of being dedicated to your licensed software tools that you use, right? So let's say for example some Windows software, some SQL software that you have that is premium and licensed for you. So your dedicated instances make room for you to be dedicated, or these instances are basically dedicated to the application requirement that you have in specific, and these are very amalgamative as well, or very supportive of these subscriptions that you have. Then you have the reserved instances. These are the most affordable ones. These are like 75% or can be up to 75% cheaper than your on-demand instances. Now, as the name suggests, reserved instances. So this is similar to your hotel reservation. Now, I've been using examples like the PGs, houses, hotel reservations, because these make a lot of sense when you talk about these pointers in particular. So please forgive if this analogy is annoying, but since I feel it is relevant, I'm using this. So again, talking about hotel reservations, let's assume that I want to visit a particular place in 3 months time. So I do my airplane ticket reservations, my bus reservations, train reservations, or even the hotel reservations in advance. So there is a high probability that I would be getting that room at a cheaper price, right? Instead of going there and renting it at the last moment. If I reserve my hotel, there is more chance of I know that I'm getting it at a fixed price and at a cheaper price most probably. So that is what reserved instances are like. So this is for applications which again do not have this spiky kind of nature, but you know that for next 6 months this is something that I would be needing, whether I do things differently or not. So since you're aware about that thing, this is where you can reserve these instances for that duration, and that is why you get this drop in price, because you're paying upfront to AWS for using these resources for this long amount of time. Uh, this is something that I discussed in the cloud computing session, cloud foundation session, where I uh, mentioned that AWS lets you rent these resources for a limited amount of time, right? So again, this is still cheaper than actually going ahead and buying your resources, because you're renting it for a limited amount of time. So yes, here the cost investment is more, not more, but you actually put in your money and you have to ensure that you use these resources for that duration. If you don't, you are still being charged because you've paid for it upfront. But then the plus point here is you can always think of it from this perspective that I would be needing these resources and I want these reserved instances. So that is what reserved instances are. And this is what the pricing model is when you talk about AWS EC2. Let's quickly see if there are any questions. So many people asked as in what is the difference between GPU and compute instances. So when you talk about GPU, these are instances that are specific to the graphical part, right? The graphical designing part, modeling part, right? So they fit in that configuration. As in, if you want to actually go ahead and uh, have instances that are intensive from this perspective, the graphical designing, 3D modeling kind of requirements, this is where you actually go ahead and use these GPU instances. So let us try and understand these instances from a different perspective, right? So these are more application based solutions that I'm talking about now when you talk about these instances. So I mentioned that general purpose instances are burstable in nature. So what do I mean by burstable in nature? Now these instances, they work at an optimum performance level. Let's assume that you have an instance that is working at uh, n amount of optimal performance. Now that is what my computation requirement is. So it's working at that requirement, but there could be a situation where there is a spike in the requirement of my computation needs, right? So in that case, I use a burstable instance. So what do I mean by a burstable instance? Basically, this instance bursts out of its optimal performance. Let's assume it is at 20% that it is working optimally at, but then there's a requirement for it to give me high computation. In that case, I would be using a burstable performance kind of instance. It can meet your data analysis need kind of applications where you have to analyze your data. Okay, so that is where burstable performance comes into picture. The other one is your EBS optimized applications. Now, when you talk about EBS optimized applications, uh, these are the applications where you basically actually go ahead and have a proper storage that is more optimized for better input and output performances, and these work optimally, so they are also available to you at a cheaper price. So to give you an example, your email management systems, right? Or let's assume, to give you an example, let's assume Great Learning here. So uh, basically what Great Learning does is we are an e-learning company, right? So there's a possibility that there are a lot of customers that constantly interact with us. So we have this thing where our marketing notifications go to people, right? So this is where a lot of email communication happens. So these kind of transactions, emails, something that need to happen on regular basis, but have to ensure that this happens at a good pace and also at a cheaper price. I can always use optimal EBS instances then. Cluster networks. Now guys, this is where functionality comes into picture. Okay, to give you an example, my browser, right? So if you talk about browser, your data is residing somewhere, its processing might happen somewhere. So probably I might need cluster of services which do different things in different clusters, right? So this is where your cluster networks come into picture. And then you have your dedicated instances. Now these are for my security critical data and my specific requirements depending upon the system or applications that I'm setting up. So when you talk about dedicated instances, they actually go ahead and meet those requirements. So if you have an application where security is a major concern for you, you want to ensure that your data is more secure, or data critical applications is something that you want to handle, this is where your dedicated applications come into picture. Okay, so guys, this was about the instances. This was about their types. I know we've discussed about a lot of instances, and uh, we've talked about quite a few things. It would take time for you to sink into these many things. I would also suggest you actually go ahead and spend some time understanding these things, because since we have 1 hour's time, it is not always possible to explain these concepts in a lot more detail. But as I've already mentioned, I would be coming up with more sessions where we would be talking about certain concepts in a lot more detail. We'd be understanding these things in a lot more detail. So more demonstrations and more understanding to these concepts in future sessions as well. But again, as I've mentioned, this is a very important and an essential topic. Ensure that you research on these topics, even when the sessions do get over. Again, to inform you, we at Great Learning have Great Learning Academy, an initiative that Great Learning has come up with, so that you can actually go ahead and master some of these skills that you want to use this COVID-19 hit lockdown time for a better upskilling purpose. So if you are interested in doing that, ensure you visit and register to Great Learning Academy, and there you can explore or have access to these courses free of cost for a limited amount of time. What time it is, something even I'm not aware about, but this courses would be available to you for a limited duration. So do take these courses and get a certification done, so that you can use that once you're out of this COVID time. Having said that, guys, let us quickly jump into the demo part. Let me quickly see if there are any questions that need answering. Could you please explain what we have to do in the pace of cloud computing? Okay, again, this is more of a career related question, if I'm not wrong. When you say pace, I'm assuming you want to ask. Okay, I actually do not understand your question very well. If you're wanting to understand how you can adopt cloud computing, probably this is something that I've discussed in my Cloud Foundation session. Maybe you can take a look at that. That happened 2 weeks back or 10 days back. So do take a look at that. Uh, if you are interested in knowing how these instances work in the space of cloud computing, well, that is something that we'll be discussing as we get into the demo part, something that I'm going to do now. So let's quickly do that. Okay. So I believe this is the only question that has come up in last 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So again, guys, if there are any questions that you feel need answering to, ensure that you put forth those questions and I can answer those questions for you. Okay, let us move further, guys, and try to understand or take a look at the demo part. Okay, so this is how the AWS Management Console looks like. Uh, Again, I walked you through this console in the previous sessions as well. Um, so in this session, we are actually going to go ahead and talk about EC2 a little more than the other services. But if you do not have an access to the free tier system or the AWS free tier console, please ensure that you actually go ahead and create a free tier account if you are starting with AWS. It is very helpful and would help you spawn and take care of a lot of services that AWS has to offer to you. What you have to do is just go there and look for AWS console, or you can actually go ahead and look for AWS free tier as well. So these things would be made available to you. So everything is given here, how to register and stuff like that. What are the resources that are made available to you for free? Say for example, Amazon DynamoDB is a database service. You have machine learning services, computation services, and stuff like that. So ensure that you do go there and create a free tier account and get started with it, the practicing part, as soon as possible. So let us quickly take a look at the demo part, as in what can be done with AWS console and EC2 in particular. So as you can see, I've recently used these services. So if you talk about this console, all these things would be available to you. And if not, you can always search for EC2. And the EC2 dashboard will open for you. So this was one of the volumes that I had launched, and I had talked about persistent and ephemeral storage. So when you talk about persistent storage, it is something that is independent of being connected to a particular instance. That means if you delete the instance, the storage connected to it won't be deleted. It would be available for you to use later. So the volume that I created here is basically persistent in nature, and that is why you can still see it here. For now we do not need it, so I'm gonna delete it. Again guys, note one thing, AWS services are available to you free of cost, but these are available to you in limited amounts. So ensure whenever you launch any services or instances, you also turn them off after a particular amount of time, okay, or just delete them. So coming back to the dashboard, now you can see the volume is not there. Let us just go ahead and, sorry guys, I stop in between at times because if there are questions that come in, I have to take those questions. So Ajay Purohit talks about explaining burstable instances again. Ajay, I would be doing that when I try to launch an instance, so your question will get answered there. Okay. So let us just go ahead and try to run an instance or launch an instance. I've done that in the past as well. Today the reason I'm doing this is I want to take you to the little steps that happen when you launch an instance. So let us do that. Let us just say launch an instance to start with. So what AWS does is, when you talk about EC2 in particular, so it basically gives you ready to use instance templates. These are called as AMIs. So AMIs are nothing but your Amazon machine images. Okay, so basically these are pre-configured templates of your instances that you can launch. To give you an example, you can see on the screen there are Linux instances, right? So when you launch this instance, it will have a pre-configured detail with it, or configuration. Basically you can read below it. It says that it comes with 5 years of support, it has a particular kernel version, right? And other details like the storage and stuff that are also there. Say for example, this one is EBS backed up, so it has EBS backing. That means your data can be secured with EBS. That is one thing. Similarly, there are other AMIs as well. You have your Red Hat AMI here, right? If you scroll down further, you'll realize that you have your Windows instance or Windows AMI as well. And some of these instances are specific for certain applications or certain application usage. To give you an example, the deep learning one here you can see is specifically designed so that it can handle your deep learning intensive requirements. Okay, so yeah, these are the things. You can actually go ahead and configure your instances in a particular manner and take a snapshot of it, create an AMI out of it, so that if you have this requirement of using that instance again and again, you can actually go ahead and just spawn that AMI for your need or your need of application to use it. Okay, so let us just go ahead and launch an instance. So guys, if you're practicing these things, try and launch your free tier instances. You can see that these instances have free tier eligible return in them. Okay, so do that, because these won't charge you. The others which do not say free tier eligible, those would be charged. Now These instances that I've mentioned, free tier ones, have limited or less amount of resources that are made available to you. So since it is a free tier instance, as you can see, number of CPUs attached, 1. Virtual CPU is what it says. Memory, it has 1 GB of memory attached to it. Some instances, I mean, there was this question somebody asked me once, isn't how long can I extend or scale my EC2 instance? I believe the answer to that question is somewhere around 16 GB, sorry, 16 TB if I'm not wrong. So you can expand that instance to that long of capacity. But again, there are charges that you would incur if you go it that far or take it that far. Because even if you talk about free tier eligible, there are certain limits to which you can have these resources customized. Performance, it's low to moderate. Again, the type of instance that you launch, depending upon that, the performance would be decided. Okay, so let us just go ahead and see or take a look at other things. There are other details here. Purchasing options, so you can see that you can do this on spot as well, something like that. Okay, because these are the ones with the minimal configuration. You have your subnet details, that is see guys, what your instance or resource you launch, it has to fall under certain network group, right? I mean, it should be connected through some network because you would be accessing these resources online. So it is very important you define this private network or the subnet under which these resources lie. So by default, it would be available in a particular availability zone. Now guys, our instance we are launching is in North Virginia. So this is the region, and there would be certain availability zones or data centers in this region. I did not check how many regions Virginia has in recent times. I had checked it once way back. So back then it was, if I'm not wrong, there were 6 regions under it. So I'm not sure if that has increased. So these are the different data centers where my data would reside. And these data centers or availability zones are also labeled as A, E, and stuff like that, C, B, depending upon the number of instances that are there in the region. So right now, we do not have any preferences for the availability zone. So it would create a default availability zone here. And then capacity, reservations and stuff. These are the things that you can actually go ahead and modify. IAM, access management role. Again, so whenever you launch a particular resource, there are certain access policies that AWS attaches to it by default. You have the freedom of modifying these things. So you can actually go ahead and create an IAM role that suits your needs, or you can let AWS do that by default. Okay, so you have that freedom of doing it. Again, so storage, you can see that the root volume here, this is the device. So even my virtual machine, as I mentioned, think of it as a chunk of resource. So that will have its independent resources, right? So it would have a root volume, and it would be having a specific capacity. You can increase the capacity of this root volume, or you can actually go ahead and attach a separate volume to it as well, right? So just like your SSD and your HDD is something that your hard disk drive, right? You can attach an HDD externally as well. So this is my SSD. It won't show any HDD here in the options because it is a root volume. If I attach more volumes, then I have the option of having all these things set up, right? So you can do that as well if you want. Next, add tags. So basically this is to help me differentiate between the instances that I create, because when you are working on applications, now this is a demo account, you do not see the other instances here, but when you are working on applications, you would be spawning up quite a few instances, and there could be a possibility that this is your organizational account, so there would be multiple people creating multiple instances. So it is always important to have relevant tags for your instances. Security group. Now this is where again you secure certain things. This falls under a security group. When you say a security group, you are talking about a group under which the instances that you launch will follow the principles that the security group has to offer. So please forgive me. You can decide what kind of security measures or what kind of traffic basically visits your instance, or what kind of traffic does your instance cater. Now you can see all the details are given here, right? So what kind of protocol am I using? What type of app am I using? What is the port that I'm using? Source through which the data is gonna flow, and the description about it. So you can actually go ahead and add more rules as well if you want, and you can decide what kind of storage, or sorry, what kind of security principles that your instance needs to have. Okay, so let us just go ahead and launch one more instance quickly and see what comes in next. It says that, okay, wait, I need to cut this thing off and just launch an instance. So guys, again, when you talk about a key pair, what happens here is basically when you try to launch a particular instance, AWS offers you a key pair, a private key that you own and a public key that AWS owns, right? So when you do provide your private key, the decrypted version, it lets you have access to your instance. So this is a double security check-in basically. So let's just go ahead and create an instance or a key pair first. Guys, always ensure that you keep your key pair with you, safe and secure. And I'm going to launch this instance because I'm going to use this key pair in when we try to log into the instance. So it is very important you basically have a key pair set. If you do lose out on that key pair, there is a high possibility that you will lose out onto your instance because there would be no way for you to log into that instance. I apologize for the distraction, guys. There is something that is coming up here. Forgive me for that. So basically the point that I was trying to talk about is when you talk about key pairs, what happens is these key pairs are something that let you access your instance. So if you've done whatever work on your instance and you close it, you basically shut it off for a while and then you try to again launch that instance, but you've lost your key pair. If that happens, you won't be able to access your resources going ahead. So ensure that your resources are up and running and you have your key pair secured with you. So let me quickly see if the instance is ready for us to take a look at all that we can do with the instance. Yep, so the security check is in place. Let's just quickly launch this instance. Or rather connect, sorry. So when you try to launch, it would take you to launching a newer instance. This is the thing that I'm going to use to connect to my instance, and I say password not available yet. Okay, so basically what happens is when your instance goes through these checks, it takes some 4 to 5 minutes for it to actually let you go ahead and use. So that is why when I said let me see if the instance is up and running, what I was doing was I was waiting to see if I could connect to it, and since it showed me this it's running, I forgot to check the fact that status checks are not done yet. So once the status checks are done, it is only then that you would be able to connect to this instance. Meanwhile, let me see if there are any questions that I can take. So can you show me how to launch a Windows instance and how to go through Windows Server? So I believe that is something that we are doing now. You'll see how we launch an instance here. Is VM different from an instance? No, VM is not different from an instance. It's just that in AWS we call them instances. VMs, now these instances are also virtual machines, right? They are virtually present. What you do with your VMs, I mean, if you talk about the other VMs that are there in the market, VMware and stuff that you use, so there too you'd be actually going ahead and launching your instances, right? What you'll do is you'll probably configure a particular type of instance and start using it, whether it's your Ubuntu and stuff. Mostly people use Ubuntu and Linux instances using the other platforms that are there, right? So it is similar here as well. You can launch those instances, but since it happens under the umbrella of AWS, they go through or happen through this platform, and they're called as instances. So there's no major difference. Meanwhile, let me also answer the question that somebody did ask me a while back, Ajay Purohit. It was about the burstable instances, right? So when you talk about burstable instances in particular, uh, I've already mentioned the fact that your general purpose instances, they work at an optimum performance or a scaled down performance. That means if my capacity is say 100 units, my instances would be working at 20 to 30 units capacity. So, and what these general purpose instances are given to you as are with certain amount of credits that basically comply to the units that you're using. Okay, let's talk in units term. It could be little vague, but let us try and understand it from this perspective. So it could be little vague because uh, I'm not talking about units in detail right now. So yes, basically what happens here is when you try to use these resources, you're using it at say a 20 unit capacity, right? So I'm using n number of credits, but I also have some reserved credits for the remaining 80%, right? So what I can do is, in case if I'm using it at a 20% computation power, I have resources that need a certain burst or a higher performance. So I can actually go ahead and make these instances perform at, or these instances actually go ahead and perform at a computation level which my application wants them to. So in that case, your performance improves accordingly. These credits, they are available to you for a limited amount of time. You have to use them in those time limits. If not, those again get credited for a longer duration after that as well, and after a while they will get expired. So that is what burstable instances are. They burst out of their optimal performance and start performing at a better or a faster rate. Let's see if we can just go ahead and connect to the instance now. So let us just get the password first. Now I can choose a particular file. Let me just quickly go to the downloads part and download the, or decrypt the key. So you basically go ahead and copy this. Done. You close this and you launch your instance. I say yes. And there you go, your virtual machine is up and running. This is a Windows machine, guys, and it is getting personalized right now. So you can see what is happening on the left hand side of your screen. Normally it happens faster, for some reason it is happening slower today. There you go. So your instance is up and running, and this is basically an EC2 instance. It is for Windows in specific. You can actually go ahead and launch Linux and Ubuntu instances as well, but the setting up process is a little different. You have to use CLI or command line interface there, and you have to use PuTTY and PuTTY for basically decrypting your key pair to connect to those instances. So but more or less they do the functionality of the VM that you are looking for. Let us just disconnect to this instance, and I'm going to go ahead and delete my instance. I believe we are already running out of time. So again guys, I'll take a couple of questions if there are any, else we can call this session off. I'd also like to inform you that Great Learning has come up with a Great Learning app where you can stream our courses seamlessly and ad free. You can also download these courses and watch those offline if you want to. We also have come up with Great Learning Academy, which lets you have free courses, somewhere around 80 plus free courses. These are for limited amount of time, and they come up with certifications as well once you complete these courses. So I would suggest that you actually go ahead and register to Great Learning Academy if you're looking to upscale in these times. So let me quickly see if there are any questions. If not, we can call it off a day for today. Then how to use PuTTY and PuTTY. Do not worry. In some of my other sessions, I would actually come up with the implementation part. It takes some time for you to actually go ahead and talk about PuTTY and PuTTY. Right now we are not in a space to actually discuss something for 15-20 minutes more. So let us do that in some other session. Do not worry, in my future sessions definitely I'll be talking about to that session. So meanwhile, you do subscribe to Great Learning channel, YouTube channel, because we do come up with these sessions quite frequently. We almost every day have live sessions, and these are informative sessions and meant for you people to learn and upskill. So do ensure you subscribe to Great Learning channel. So somebody asks, as in, can you install Docker on EC2? Right? See, when you talk about installing stuff like Docker and Kubernetes, see, there are instances that come up with support to these. Now, for people who do not know what Docker and Kubernetes is, these are basically containerization tools. So if you talk about EC2 instances, they come configured with these capabilities which support these kind of processing. So yes, you can actually go ahead and launch those kind of instances as well and do the things that you mentioned in the question. Okay, so guys, my stream is running 10 minutes late. I mean, I get your updates, not 10 minutes, 10 seconds late basically. So I do not see any questions yet. So I believe we are done for the day. Again, if there are any questions, do ensure that you put it in the comment section of this video, because post this session would be uploaded in the form of video on Great Learning's YouTube channel. So if you have questions related to this topic, ensure that you put those questions in the comments box once the session is available on our YouTube channel. So we would be responsive to you on those questions as well, and we'll try and answer those questions at the earliest. As far as this session goes, guys, I would be resting it here. Thank you. Bye bye. Have a nice weekend.